Thank you very much. I'm really delighted to be here. And some people who watch TEDtalks may know something about the speakers, and if you do, I'm New York's answer to Sir Ken Robinson. The slides that I'm going to show you this evening are really, they're very unremarkable. They are here because it keeps me on track. And I'm old and I need to be kept on track because I forget a lot of things. So these slides are for me more than they are for you. But let me begin with the purpose, I think, of these few minutes that I have with you today. And that would be summed up best by the social activist and poet Muriel Rukeyser, who said, "The universe is made of stories, not atoms." And from the first moment I heard that profound sentence, I said to myself, you know, that's what teaching is like. Teaching is like listening and telling stories. And unfortunately, too many policymakers and politicians and people who run the educational system have forgotten that they are a product of their stories. Instead, they have chosen to atomize teaching and learning. They've chosen to make it a number. And if you've been following what's happening to teaching, teaching is now simply filling up, kind of pouring into the vessel, filling it up, and then passing it along. That is not what I signed up for 43 years ago. When I started teaching, it was a different kind of teaching than what is happening today. And unfortunately, teachers and their craft have been compromised by people who are not in the know. And that is very distressing. And I think that when teachers become disenfranchised from the teaching process, we lose something very precious in our democracy. So what I'm going to take you through today is my story. I'd like to kind of take you through my narrative, and to the extent that it enlightens you and helps you understand a teacher of 43 years and why I say that unless we fight back, unless we do something about this really terrible hazard that confronts us, we will lose one of the most precious parts of childhood, and I would suggest precious parts of our world, and that is the teaching and learning process. So let me begin with my story. I'm going to ask all of you for a moment just to think of the teacher that stands out in your mind as the most important person in your life as you were growing up. And then I want you to think of one that didn't quite fit the bill, didn't do it for you. And I would suggest to you that the themes that I'll express to you in a moment are the same themes that you're thinking about, or similar themes. So I'll start with my 5th grade teacher. And I remember to this day, and we're talking 50 some odd years ago, when I was in 5th grade and in Brooklyn, a place that I loved, that day I must have been thinking a lot about Brooklyn because we were doing a geography lesson, and the teacher, noticing that I guess I was daydreaming, she said to me, "What country do you live in?" And I looked up and I said, "Brooklyn?" And she, instead of laughing with me, instead of making me feel comfortable, embarrassed me, humiliated me in front of my friends. And to this moment, 50 years later, I carry that in my heart as a dark spot in my heart. That's the kind of teacher that we don't want in our system, and that's the kind of teacher that does atomize the thinking of the process and doesn't understand that there is forgiveness, there is a sense of generosity as you're dealing with students, especially students who make mistakes, especially ones who don't get it right. So now fast forward to 12th grade, biology, not necessarily my favorite subject. In fact, I came in early in the morning because I needed it to graduate. 7 a.m., the teacher made biology a joy because there were I don't remember mistakes in biology. What I remember is feeling wonderful about learning new terms and new things about the body, new things about animals. And I remember the joy in my fellow students because it was a sense of this is great stuff. There's a spark that he ignited in us that made us feel, even if those who are somewhat disinterested in the subject, we felt great to be there. Even as 18-year-olds at 7 o'clock in the morning, it was great to be there. So I suggest to you that biology teacher needs to be nurtured and supported today and unfortunately is being seen too often as simply, did you make your numbers? And those of you who have been following, that's what a teacher is supposed to do nowadays, make the numbers on tests, make personal numbers for scores, because school for many has simply turned into a set of numbers. So let me tell you that when I was a teacher, and I was an English teacher at first, I had a student, and I tell this story quite often because it also stays within my heart and soul so deeply, who was a selective mute. And that means a child who cannot speak, not because she organically can't speak, but she chooses not to speak. And she sat in my class for an entire year and did not say one word. And I honored her in her silence. I never made her feel that she was less than. I always included her as if she was a perfectly functional kid. And do you know that 2 years later she came back to me fully speaking in full sentences at all times, saying to me how much she appreciated the fact that I never made her feel small, that I never made her feel that she was less than or a second-class citizen in my class. Now, you know, today, that would not serve the purposes of the new functionaries who believe that I would have failed today with a student like that because I didn't give her a good set of preparation skills for test scores. So we're more than a number, us teachers. We are stories, and these are the stories that have shaped me and I think shaped my students. I also did something called values clarification, and this was 40 years ago. I don't think it would pass muster today. But 40 years ago, I talked to the kids about their sense of values and purpose as citizens, their sense of tolerance, a sense of getting along with one another. And the material that I read, including A Raisin in the Sun, To Kill a Mockingbird, Romeo and Juliet, we did around themes of values. We did around themes of, can you support this as an individual? We wanted to hear the voices of children. We wanted to hear their stories because their stories are where you engage the student. I want to hear their stories and how they can relate to Romeo's passion for Juliet, how they can relate to prejudice in their hometown, how they can relate to issues of family and how difficult it can be. We want to hear those voices. We want to hear those narratives. Teachers' narratives, students' narratives should be the most important things that happen in schools. And finally, I was a drama coach, loved being a drama coach, and I brought drama into my classroom. We would turn our poetry into short videos. We would turn our short stories into videos. And we'd make those videos and practice and rehearse them and get to know the characters that way. Again, I don't think that would pass muster today because it wouldn't be test prep. And instead, it would be creative, it would be joyful, it would be spontaneous. Unfortunately, those kinds of priorities are not in our schools today. I was a principal and a central office and administrator and a superintendent of schools for many years. And I took those values and those stories from my childhood, from my teaching years, and I hope I served the teachers and kids well in my leadership roles, which included my observation of teachers, always looking, always making sure that I listened to the stories of the teachers so they could tell me about their kids. They could tell me what it was that their kids needed, so that they could tell me their own personal stories and how they would weave those stories into the classroom. I would create atmospheres in the school where kids and teachers and parents felt welcomed, not judged, not valued, not ranked. We would have things that were developmentally appropriate. When I was a junior high school principal, we would never give 12-year-olds the kind of shellacking that they're getting today with the tests that they have to take. We made sure that those kids, we understood brain growth, we understood emotional growth in ways that seem to be just forgotten today. And finally, and perhaps most importantly, a nurturing environment that is forgiving, That's the kind of thing that makes kids feel welcome. That's the kind of thing that makes kids feel they want to go to school. That's the kind of thing that I want to learn because, you know what, if I make a mistake, if I step out of bounds, there's a forgiveness. I don't see that today. I see a harshness and it troubles me. And I can give you two lessons from my own life. And again, hear my story again. I wanted to try golf. I was getting older. I figured I'd try golf. People say you can take golf and be a golfer until you're in your 80s. Well, I took a golf lesson and I was terrible. I knew I was terrible, but I needed a lesson. I figured, well, I'll go to a teacher. Well, I had a gentleman who was the golf pro at this place I went to, and he stood behind me and I could hear him making noises behind me as I missed the ball, and he would grunt, and then he would smack my hand, and then he'd tell me, no good. And I felt so demeaned by that experience that, I gave up golfing before I even began. And there was an opportunity there for me to do something with my life that would be athletic and interesting, social, and I got so turned off by the teacher. So my life lesson, my life story is, I'll give you his name, don't go to that golf pro. But then I switched to this experience, and this experience was, I never boated before. My wife and I said, we live near the shore, let's buy a boat. We bought a boat not knowing at all that we could even drive the thing. I looked for the brake, in fact, the first couple of times. I said, how do you stop this thing? Well, we got a captain to help us, and he stood behind me, and he gently and very gingerly had me steer the boat, never saying a word of discouragement throughout the experience, making sure that I felt comfortable, but yet pushing me a little bit, pushing me, but making sure I felt comfortable, making sure that I didn't feel judged, making sure that I had a sense of, you can do this, a sense of confidence, and I became a very good boater. I became a good captain. And it's only because I had a teacher who had those gifts that made me feel comfortable, made me feel as if I can stretch myself. So 2 lessons in my life, 2 stories from my life that really have embedded themselves deeply within me when I talk about my philosophy of teaching. And this is simply because I'm in higher ed now. I'll tell you that there are wonderful people to read who can support our great intuitions about teaching and learning. And those people, and I'm just going to give you a quick thumbnail sketch of these people for further reading pleasure if you care to. William Glasser, a great psychologist, said, if high schools don't have fun for kids and freedom for kids, we lose something important. I wonder the last time the mayors and the governors who run the system said, let's have some fun and freedom in our high schools. Lev Vygotsky said, there's a zone of development. He called it the zone of proximal development, a place where we can really stretch kids if they feel safe, if they feel they have a mentor, they feel someone who can guide them, they'll stretch. John Dewey, one of the greatest thinkers about education of all time, the thing I most extract from his work is that if education doesn't have meaning, if you can't derive meaning from your work, you will not be engaged, you will not grow. Piaget talked about the growth levels, the growth experiences, and how developmental stages are so important. Have we really looked at developmental stages when we're giving 5-year-olds high-stakes testing and 12-year-olds high-stakes testing and 17-year-olds high-stakes testing? It seems like one size fits all, and there's a complete disregard for developmental changes. Jonathan Kozol talks about savage inequalities in our school system, how race and poverty mitigate against healthy experiences in school, and until we deal with those kinds of things, we can't get the kinds of things we'd like to ultimately in schools. David Berliner, a great professor from Arizona State, talks about if we're going to do something upstream and we're not going to worry about it downstream, then we've got a problem because the people are polluting upstream and we're getting the contaminants downstream, and this is what we have to live with. So if the policymakers and the politicians and the media upstream give us the rules and regulations, by the time it gets downstream, we need to make sure that we push back and say, you know what, you people upstream have to watch how you're polluting. And then finally, Stephen Jay Gould, the great sociobiologist from Harvard, talks about our obsession, and he talked about this 25 years ago, and he was prescient because he talked about our obsession with reification and rank. We'll take a mysterious concept like intelligence and have to give it a number. So we need a number, and that's our IQ, he said, and it was never intended to be used as it was originally. And he said, if you take a number, and today we're so numbers crazy, after you get your number, you want to rank. So we're all ranking each other, everything from valedictorians to salutatorians, and then on down. Where are you on the list? What rank are you? As early as 2nd, 3rd, and 4th grade, what rank are you? So what we're talking about is a world gone numbers crazy in education, and it's not going to serve us because education is about making people excited. It's about sharing stories. is about narratives that can pull people in. It is not about simply filling things up and measuring them. And ladies and gentlemen, I'm here to tell you that if we as educators and those parents who are in the audience today do not push back at people, policymakers, politicians, and the media who are looking to demonize teachers, looking to really fracture the wholeness of a school system that really cares about the whole child, then we have not done our service as democratic citizens in a democracy. We need to push back against what is maybe perhaps the most pervasive, ill-served set of policy decisions I have seen in my lifetime. And as the great William Butler Yeats says, and I live by this quote, education is not the filling of a pail, it is the lighting of a fire. And in the words of Mary Oliver, I challenge all of us, be ignited or be gone. Thank you very much.